Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, we are very honored that the Africa Energy Indaba has allowed us to organize a session that will be focusing on energy access, but in particular, access to clean cooking solutions. Several years ago, when we mobilized the global community at the United Nations to establish a sustainable development goal number 7 for access to affordable, reliable, modern energy services, we made sure that the discussions to agree on that sustainable development goal number 7, the discussions did not only focus on electrification. It was very deliberate that we wanted to discuss electrification and access to clean cooking solutions. And if you look at the targets of Sustainable Development Goal number 7, particularly the targets on energy access, it's been very clear that access to clean cooking solutions was crucial. Let me put it in context. Globally, there are about 3 billion people that do not have access to modern cooking services. We're talking about 3 billion people who cannot cook safely, or they die simply because they are cooking meals for their families. And these are mainly women and children. And part of the cause of that is household air pollution that is coming from the use of biomass, but other sources of energy for their cooking needs. Today, we've been able to put together a very solid program. We've brought together several institutions to enlighten all of us about some of the efforts that are going on globally to address this issue. Some of us call it the silent tsunami. We don't feel it, but it's killing over 4 million people every year. Just think about it, 4 million people every year. Just COVID alone has killed about that number in the last year and a half. But think about it, in the case of household air pollution, it's every year. This is happening around the world. And of course, the case of Africa is very serious. 85% of the people in sub-Saharan Africa, outside of South Africa, rely on biomass for their cooking needs. Just think about it, over 600,000 premature deaths every year due to household air pollution. So it is not only a health issue, it is also an environmental issue because the forests are disappearing to feed that demand for firewood and charcoal. In addition to that, it is also an economic problem because indeed it's household air pollution causes a lot of illness, and it's a major cause of morbidity in both men, women, but also particularly children. It's a climate problem because of course the black char and the carbon released is also causing issues related to climate change. So today we've put a good panel together. We have key institutions that have been looking at this issue for over a decade, research, good analysis, good policy advice to governments around the world about what we can do to solve it. We have the Modern Energy Cooking Services Program at the University of Loughborough. We have the Clean Cooking Alliance, which is a global alliance of many actors around the world, including private sector, civil society groups, governments as well are involved in the Clean Cooking Alliance. We also have the World Bank with us, who has been a major player in dealing with energy systems across the world, but also setting energy plans in a number of African countries and financing major energy projects. We have Energia. Energia has also been a key advocate for energy access, particularly to empower women. And when you think about it, in Africa in particular, after harvest, it is the women who do the processing of a lot of the agricultural products to take to market. And all that value chain, along that value chain, you require energy solutions, which are typically provided by burning firewood and charcoal. We're very pleased to also have a government representative here who personally, but also as a government, they've been leading the charge within the UN, World Bank, and other multilateral institutions that we have to address this issue of providing universal access to clean cooking solutions for all, particularly those in Africa. So I gave you the context why it is urgent that we deal with this. I have given you the economic, health, and social reasons and environmental reasons why it is important. We want to also talk now about some of the solutions that have come forward. We're very pleased that, in fact, the United Nations, September last year, hosted a special discussion on energy transitions around the world, the first of its kind in over 3 decades. And clean cooking solutions, access to clean cooking solutions was given a high prominence and was debated by all member states and agreed that we should take action to make technology, finance, and other solutions available to solve these problems. And so with that background, I'm very pleased that we've put a good panel together. I'll introduce our panelists from these key institutions when we come to the panel discussion session. But to put it in context, we've asked one of our colleagues to lead us, to do a short presentation, 10, 15 minutes, to put the discussions in context. And at this point, I would like to invite Professor Ed Brown, who is the lead person for the Modern Energy Cooking Solutions at the University of Loughborough Sustainable Transitions, Energy and Environment Resilience Program at the University of Loughborough. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Kende. I feel quite humbled to be asked to do the opening speech within such illustrious company as you've just gone through. Hopefully I will take just a short amount of time. And what I want to do in this opening piece is to tie together two of parts of the agenda that Kende mentioned at the start, which is to connect the debates over clean cooking and energy access with the net zero climate agenda. So that's the kind of focus of what I want to do, but I want to just kind of use some of the context that Kende just gave us. And I don't think I need to go into this with our panel today in any great detail, because I think everyone knows the level of the crisis, the silent tsunami that Kende talked about, that we are currently experiencing. The numbers of people that are dying prematurely, the hours lost in collecting fuel, the risk from injury and violence from going and searching ever further from home for those fuels, the environmental impacts that Kende talked about, deforestation and impacts on water tables, and the compromised productivity that so many households face because of the higher levels of illness and so on. So I think all of those factors and how it affects individual people's lives, and particularly women and children, are the reason why we still need to take a massive amount of action to deal with this issue. We also know that in the context of considerable improvements in relation to the other aspects of SDG 7, this is the area where things are not advancing in the same way that we would hope. It's also, as I think we all mentioned, that it's a global phenomenon. It's not only to do with individual people's lives and the effects of their impacts upon their health and their local environments. It's also a significant component. I mean, it suggests here that the actual amount of emissions is only a small percentage of global emissions. However, there's an increasing amount of work at the moment that suggests that in some ways this may be something of an underestimate. Also, as Kende mentioned, black carbon in some parts of the world is a very significant component of global warming, and clearly the burning of residential solid fuels accounts for a significant proportion of global black carbon emissions, and in some places is even higher than that 58% that's mentioned on the slide. So I think one of the reasons, so we are, in terms of where are we now, what have we learned? Well, the first thing is that tackling this issue, whilst there's been a tremendous amount of energy exerted in trying to tackle the issue of clean cooking, the numbers of people that are now getting access to modern cooking fuels is really barely keeping up with population growth and is falling way behind in terms of a lot of the other SDG targets. Kende mentioned 3 billion. The work we did with Yabe a couple of years ago in thinking through what it meant in terms of access to modern energy cooking services, so beyond the very, very most basic access to cleaner fuels, something like 4 billion people are still extensively utilizing traditional biomass for at least a significant portion of their cooking needs. The second issue is that many of the solutions that we were proffering 10 years ago have been found not to do everything that they claimed. They are not as attractive to those that they have been aimed at and marketed at, and so haven't taken off in the ways that might have been hoped. And even where they have, they've been abandoned. Their health impacts have not been as great as has been claimed for them, and similar to some degree with some of the carbon impacts. And a number of the carbon organisations are currently going through a recalibration of some of the lower tier stoves in relation to that. But more than anything, what we've learned is that clean cooking has not been prioritised. And one of the major reasons why it hasn't been prioritised is it's been seen as a women's issue. And it's really important that we see the attention paid to clean cooking embraced at the highest levels by government. Over the last 2 or 3 years, there has been significant movement in those circumstances. As Candace said, I lead a large UK government programme that is exploring some of these solutions and in new directions. I won't go into everything that we're doing. If people are interested, then please go to the MEX website and have a look at some of the things we're doing. Everyone else on this panel is also doing a significant amount of new research, new implementation in new directions in relation to these issues. What are these new directions, and in what way are we seeing this change? Well, first and foremost, as Candace mentioned, over the last 12 months, we've begun to see the political commitment that's needed to tackle clean cooking beginning to be there, both in terms of countries like Kenya, where Paul joins us from today, Nepal, and a whole range of other countries that have really rapidly begun to promote clean cooking. Similarly, on the global agenda, many organisations are now putting clean cooking at a much higher level within their priorities. And this is tied, I think, to increasing action on health because of COVID, and also increasing attention to climate and the role that carbon can play in relation to these issues. And so, as Candace said, we see cooking at an equal billing to electricity in the high-level political dialogue last year. We see cooking increasingly formulated within the NDCs, and we see cooking beginning to be discussed at COP26 far more than it has been in the past. We see new business models emerging, new investments. I'm sure that Dimfna will talk about this later. Growing role for LPG, seeing as a major transition fuel. Growing role for ethanol, and I'll mention a lot more later on around electricity. We also see the emergence of some new technologies that will provide considerable take up in the future, bio-LPG, hydrogen, and so on. And the area that I want to concentrate most on in what follows, the role of electricity within all of this. However, we still need to do an awful lot more to build on this momentum. Far too often, clean cooking is seen as an add-on or an entirely separate challenge to the energy challenge. For example, we have been following the AU-EU summit last week. There was a massive new announcement of European funding to Africa, one of the dimensions of which was energy. I looked through the whole of the announcement on energy to find something on clean cooking. It wasn't there. There's been a big call from the Africa-Europe Foundation, which I'm sure Candace may talk about later on, or Dimfna. It's really, really important that there is an opportunity to pursue clean cooking within that. Cooking needs to be seen as a full part of integrated energy planning, which is where the international community is now moving. Similarly, whilst there is more money coming into clean cooking, the amount of funding, even with several new announcements this year, is still minuscule in relation to the amount that we need. So where will that money come from? Where will the resources come to match the political ambition that we're now seeing? I can't talk about all of this now, I don't have a lot of time, but I want to talk about two components of this. Firstly, climate finance. We're recording this on a day when the world seems to be heading in a very dangerous direction in Europe at the moment. I really, really hope that this doesn't put us off track from some of the advances that have been made over the course of the last year that I've been talking about. COP26 saw some massive movements in terms of accelerated decarbonisation and massive recommitment by the international community towards real meaningful climate change. But it's also seen in the months since then some tensions emerge between different parts of the global community. For example, between Europe and Africa over the role of gas and the rights of Africa to continue to fund gas. The record of the North in terms of funding announcements and the actual keeping to the announcements that have been made, and perhaps something of an idea of there being different rules for different regions. There are also debates emerging about everyone is saying we need to commit to long-term zero carbon goals by 2050, but we also need to meet the 2030 energy access goals. At the moment, the debates over these two components seem to be happening separately. What's really important is we define what we mean by interim fuels and that we plan for decarbonisation and development to occur hand in hand. And so I think it's really important, and I do this as a call in this meeting, to call on the world's political leaders and Africa's political leaders to endorse the net zero 2050 targets for cooking and commit to achieving them alongside the 2030 access targets, and for the international community to commit international climate and development finance to support those commitments. The second area of funding is, I'm sure none of the other members on this panel will be surprised by me talking about electricity infrastructure as a major source of this. But I mentioned earlier that whilst the investment in clean cooking fuels and stoves is increasing, it's still far below the volumes required to meet 2030 targets. For example, taken from the SE for All energising finance reports, the amount of investment in clean cooking in 2017 was 48 million US dollars. That had increased to 133 million in 2018, and it had gone up still further on that. However, our estimations of what is needed annually to achieve full access are at around 4.5 billion. Also, the figures of those estimates and the current investment levels are not massively accurate. We need more detailed information. They don't cover all of the LPG investment costs particularly well and so on. Also, none pretty well or very little of the funding that goes into electricity has been included because electricity is frequently left out of the picture when looking at energy finance for cooking. So our argument is that as electricity access is being enhanced, both through grid extension and through improvement of the electricity networks, why is that expenditure not also being drawn upon to meet cooking energy demands? We reckon that there's around 153 million people globally that have gained access to electricity each year. And this builds on a significant annual investment of around 100 billion a year, of which 31 billion is used to be invested in new connections. Just a small amount of that funding utilised to ensure that people can cook using the systems that are developed would make a massive sea change. And so as international efforts are stepped up to meet the challenge, the opportunity to kill two birds with one stone by using electrification expenditure to also address modern energy cooking needs to be grasped firmly and promoted strongly. I still have a few slides left, which I will go through very quickly because I know we want to move on to the discussion. But I want to just set a few myths straight before we finish. So the argument will go, isn't electric cooking too expensive and isn't it too far off being implemented at scale for us to be talking about it seriously today? We've done detailed work on this over the last 3 years. I mentioned the MEX website. This is probably the biggest, longest detailed study that we produced with Yabe and her colleagues. Do please go and have a look at this. In essence, though, perceptions on cooking tend to be handed down from generation to generation. And there is an assumption that cooking with electricity is too expensive. However, over recent years, there's been the emergence of a whole series of different efficient electric cooking appliances that use a fraction of the energy of traditional hot plates and are now available in local markets, rice cookers, electric pressure cookers, and so on. Similarly, the prices of traditional fuels have increased in many contexts where wood fuel has become increasingly scarce, and the fear with the current climate is that other fossil fuel-based fuels may also increase significantly in their cost. So we now have evidence from many countries that cooking with electricity, both grid and increasingly off-grid, can be cost-effective with current practice where people are paying for fuels. That's the big issue. The graph that you can see on here comes from data from Kenya for long cook meals, but it shows the substantial savings that can be made from using efficient electric appliances. And you can see also the range of different appliances, where they're used most effectively and how they differ from the traditional electric oven and hot plate. This slide has got an awful lot of information on it, but I wanted to just say a few other points around this. Firstly, many countries are seeing significant advances in electrification. Newly connected customers tend to be on the lowest tariff bands, making it difficult for utilities to recover their investment. If we include cooking demand, we can increase revenue both for the grid and for mini-grid customers. Recent investment in power generation also means that in an increasing number of countries, there's a surplus of electricity. So we're not dealing with grid utilities that are worried about not being able to accommodate increasing demand. Indeed, they're desperate to find new sources of demand. Similarly, we're beginning to work effectively with a number of mini-grid developers who are also showing a keen interest in cooking as a means of increasing loads and reducing tariffs. Similarly, the planned decarbonisation of electricity systems, which occurs globally, and the growing off-grid sector, make e-cooking the approach that suits for accelerated decarbonisation. There's also some points here around financing mechanisms and the targeted subsidies that the electricity sector have a lot of experience with. So overall, the really important thing is that as we continue to see investment in electricity infrastructure, we need to make sure that that infrastructure is developed in such a way that it can meet future demand for cooking and be delivered in that kind of a way. And in that way, we can bring the two sides of SDG 7 delivery together. We're beginning to see this happen in many places. I'm sure Paul will talk about our new project where we're collaborating on a new national e-cooking strategy for Kenya. Uganda have just released a new cooking tariff aimed at lower levels specifically to encourage cooking. And we have a partnership which we're embarking on with Umeme, the national utility. Nepal has set a national target for an e-cooking device in every home by 2028. There are several of the utilities in India that are beginning to embrace, such as with this particular advert from the Indian market. And we're beginning to see new approaches that are targeting the expansion of electric cooking through carbon credits and also through a series of new RBF programs, the big one that's been announced by NEFCO and CEDA recently, and we're currently in discussion with several other major funders of those kinds of programs. Last two slides. We call on planners, strategists, donors to embrace something that we call 40-60 by 2030, which is a call to bring together the decarbonisation and impact planning goals by two simple factors by 2030. That we call for a target of 40% of all households that are connected to grid or off-grid electricity to be using it for cooking by 2030. And we call for a target of 60% of those utilising modern energy for cooking to be utilising energy generated from low carbon sources by 2030. In the case of electricity, how do we scale this? This is taken from a major event that was held in Uganda recently. We need to promote the use of efficient electric cooking devices in grid-connected areas and ensure that grid extension can facilitate electric cooking. We need to support the initial cost of appliances through developing on-bill financing, RBF programs, and so on. We need to promote the use of electric cooking by programs that can support credit for purchase and keep tariffs low and comparable with grid tariffs by overall increasing the overall level of utilisation of the electricity. We need to explore targeted subsidisation along the lines that many electricity generators already utilise, and we need to explore new forms of data-driven carbon finance for electric cooking with associated co-benefits. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Ed Brown. We are very grateful for this extensive and detailed presentation. I am sure that our listeners and participants have made profuse notes, and I'm sure in the online discussions, they will raise a number of questions for you. We've put together a very impressive panel to be able to digest some of what Professor Brown has presented for us here. This panel will also add their own views from their institutions, since they've been working on these many issues for several years. Our first panelist is Madame Dimfna van der Lans, Chief Executive Officer of the Clean Cooking Alliance. Dimfna has worked and lived in China, India, Kenya, and engaged with small island nations in the Caribbean and the Indian and Pacific Oceans
to support their transition away from polluting diesel fuels to renewable sources of energy. She has held many hats, several organizations, but she leads this global strategic alliance of many players, private sector, governments, financial institutions, and also civil society groups to bring solutions to the clean cooking question. Also, we have on the panel Dr. Yabe Zhang, Senior Energy Specialist of the World Bank SMAP program. Dr. Zhang manages the Clean Cooking Fund at the Energy Sector Management Assistance Program, SMAP, of the World Bank. Yabe has led various energy projects in East Asia and the Pacific, Europe and Central Asia, and the Africa region with a focus on energy access, energy efficiency, renewable energy, and climate change. She comes with a vast experience, and we're very happy that she's also spending quite a bit of time now in our own continent in Africa. We have on the panel also Mr. Paul Mbuti, Deputy Director of Renewable Energy, Ministry of Energy, Directorate of Renewable Energy of Kenya. Paul is currently Senior Deputy Director of Renewable Energy at the Ministry of Energy. He holds a BS and MS degrees in Environmental Health and Environmental Planning and Management, both from Kenya University. Paul has over 30 years experience in dealing with energy issues, but we are very pleased, personally very pleased, that Paul has been the leader for us at the government level, mobilizing governments around the world in Africa, has chaired some sessions for us at the United Nations and other multilateral institutions to give the reality of what a lack of energy, clean cooking solutions means for people, but also what his government is doing to prioritize this and mobilize other leaders, including heads of states, to pay greater attention to this issue. Finally, on the panel, we have Dr. Maggie Matinga. She's coming from a mechanical engineering background. Dr. Matinga holds a PhD in energy anthropology and has over 17 years of experience in energy access in least developed and transition countries in Africa and Asia. So you can see that we've put together a very solid panel for you, and I'll probably put the discussions in three key thematic areas. One is we take the context now of Africa, the challenges we see, will move within that context, a discussion on some of the solutions and reactions to some of what Professor Ed Brown has presented. And then we'll come to a second theme where we'll look at technology and finance. We know the issues, but the question is, what are some of the solutions, business models that we see now existing? And then finally, the whole issue of political mobilization. We know that energy issues are sensitive around the world. Politics matters, public policy matters if we're going to get the speed and scale of actions we see. So let me start with the first two panelists from their vantage points. I will start with Madame Dilfna van der Lans. When you look at Africa, what are the challenges and opportunities you see now? Dr. Brown mentioned that yes, the problems are there, but he sees some movement, some momentum happening in the last year or two, and but the challenges still exist. When you look at it, what is your own perspective as you look at Africa now, challenges and opportunities?
Yeah, thank you, Kande, and it's really wonderful to be with everybody, and thank you for your leadership in continuing to bring attention to the issue of clean cooking, especially in Africa. So I'm always honored and humbled to be in your to be with you, Kande. So it's really wonderful, and with all of the other panelists as well. I think for Africa specifically, some of the points that were mentioned already by Ed Brown are really focused on, like, how do we make sure that we even can keep up with population growth, but even more desirably, how do we make sure that we achieve universal access to clean cooking in Africa in the coming years and decades ahead. I think we see some opportunities, still some challenges remaining, but I'm an optimistic kind of person, so I really want to look at the opportunities that we see for ourselves. And so one of the things that we've really focused on with the Clean Cooking Alliance is what does at a country level, what does a government need? What kind of support does a government need to make sure that they have the right capabilities and capacity and financing to design and then implement clean cooking programs. And so one of the new initiatives that we've recently launched is called the Delivery Units Network. And the Delivery Units Network will make sure that we work with, in the initial phase, about 10 countries in Africa to make sure that within their government, there is a team of people whose only job it is to think about clean cooking. All too often, as already has been mentioned, clean cooking either gets add on at the very last moment when governments are thinking about energy programs, or it's forgotten at all because nobody has the responsibility to only think about clean cooking. And so we want to make sure that at a government level, there are teams put in place with the right capabilities, with the right financing, and with the right ability to access even more financing to design and implement really ambitious clean cooking programs within their country. And so these delivery units will be established in the next 2 years or so, with the aim to really create a cohort of these delivery units through the Delivery Units Network, so that we can make sure that when a policy is designed in, for example, Kenya, other countries can learn from that policy and replicate it, and we can to scale much more quickly. And so that, from our perspective, is a really exciting opportunity, and one that we're finding has lots of tractions in the sort of the ecosystem when we think about access to financing to implement these clean cooking programs. So that's a really exciting development that we're seeing. Related to that, if you think about the ecosystem that needs to be created within a country and within a region where trade increasingly plays a really important role in Africa as well, we really see lots of really exciting and innovative business models emerging from the private sector with whom we're working. So my team is currently in Nairobi, meeting with with many of the ventures that are in our Venture Catalyst program, to continue to work with these companies to see what else can we give them to support their growth and international and regional expansion in Africa. And so we want to make sure that those products and clean cooking services are appropriate, are affordable, and are scalable, which is really what fundamentally I think all of us really want to and have to focus on. How do we achieve scale in this ecosystem? And so designing programs that will allow governments to design really great clean cooking programs and then find the appropriate financing to implement them, because we have to move on from planning to implementation. We can't just be stuck in the planning side, as well as really great innovation on business models and technologies and abilities for people to pay for clean cooking services. Those two things are really exciting for me right now. And I think this year and the next year actually will be a really critical year for Africa to really scale out their clean cooking ambition. Kande, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll go to the ground. Paul, you have been our anchor in Kenya. It has been wonderful when we go there that we know that, yes, in the ministry in Kenya, next to the minister and the permanent secretary, we have somebody who understands the subject. How do you see the challenges, but also a little bit of comment on what Dilna said? If you don't have the technical people within the ministry, when they're having the bigger discussion of energy planning, clean cooking will only be an add-on, maybe if you're lucky, at the end of the discussion. Paul, how do you see it?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kande, and thank you to my colleagues. Let me pick it from that point of planning. I do think that we really need to ensure that planning in energy properly integrates cooking, so that all the issues that deal with clean cooking and the kind of impediments that exist can be targeted for address. So I think, yes, it is extremely important that we look at how do we ensure that the right skill sets are available to enable people be able to mainstream the thinking and the concepts that promote and accelerate clean cooking access. Now, if I may just go to the point of what are these challenges that we see? And of course, in Africa, you will know that this is a front line where a lot of countries have hitherto remained with very low levels of access to clean cooking. Indeed, Sub-Saharan Africa is the world's largest geographical area where access to clean cooking is at the lowest, and yet the impacts are monumental. So in this sense, we see the challenge also at the ground level. And Kande, you're right that the real action is at the point of last mile. Because I see that even as we talk to consumers about the potential to accept these modern cooking options, there is still a lot of social perceptions, and Ed Brown tried to bring out that people are kind of resisting to change from what they have always used. And because of that historical reason, you will find that there are communities who feel that they have always gotten cooking fuel free of charge because they could go collect it from wherever it is in the bushes and in the forests. But things have changed, and that is what the social resistance that we see, that people tend not to want to change from what they have always been doing. And this is one thing that we need to really counter at a strategy level, so that when we are making interventions, we are able to provide sufficient awareness, sufficient evidence, and thanks to research, a lot of work has been published that provide clear evidence. And Ed Brown and colleagues have done some significant work in Kenya. And these have enabled us to begin to see the evidence very clear that it is not simply about affordability. While affordability is still a challenge, the big issue is it is the perception. And people may have the ability to buy those solutions, but for other reasons, they just tend to resist. And this is really what we need to look at as a big issue that we need to address. Now, looking at also the issue of the policies that different countries have provided, and the institution that I work for has a role of policy and strategy development, resource mobilization, and oversight. Now, as we do these things, we must be conscious of this fact that, as a matter of fact, we must ensure that policies are articulating the real issues on the ground, the issues that we need to focus on. And so we've tried to say, look, it is not just about the political awareness, it's also at the ground level, the grassroots, because you may have a policy, but that policy may not be making an impact if the people targeted do not believe that these solutions are really for their benefit. And so this is where we are saying it must be an approach where we use multiple ways, multiple stakeholders, and multiple sector approaches to be able to attack this problem. Cooking is not only just an energy problem, it is a health issue. It is a socio-economic issue. We really need to look at it from that very broad base so that we can be able to isolate where the weak linkages are so that we can target them. Now, my third point is, when you look at the political priorities, and I think Ed Brown is right, that the political prioritization has historically not been high for cooking. Almost in every country in Africa, you find, particularly South Africa, you find that the level of priority in terms of funding, in terms of attention, in terms of clarity of action, these have been missing. And so now countries need to begin to say, do we have a clarity and focus on the specific issues that we must address so that we can unlock that process to accelerate access and adoption of the clean cooking options. So this is really the issue that we need to address. Now, the fourth thing, and allow me just say it, that we lack the support infrastructure We do not have manufacturing taking place in many of the countries. So these devices, this hardware, are not available as and when they are needed. And they are not available cost effectively, because if we have to buy materials from elsewhere, or if just a few people are to do the artisanal production, then that in itself lends itself to become a challenge. And so in Kenya, if I now bring home the issue, Kenya is now trying to put together a number of interventions, tackling it from the climate change side, where we have the GCF funding an activity where we would like to professionalize the improved cook stove program. And mind you that these cook stoves are just transitional, because ultimately we must bear in mind that electricity remains the major energy carrier going forward. And so we need to also begin to emphasize that we must be talking about the clean cooking options, not just the intermediates. And this is where we need to go to the bigger picture. We need to see huge investments, and we need to see entrepreneurs who are serious and want to do big things, the bigger picture. That is what we are looking for. So in this sense, this cooking space is not going to change if we still remain tokenistic, providing token funding, providing token interventions, speaking more than we are doing. We must now translate the talking to actions, and these actions must be there to cause change. Over and back to you, Candy.
Thank you so much, Paul. You raised so many issues. I am just bursting here to see how I jump in myself, but I cannot be the emperor looking at the arena and jumping to be a gladiator as well. So let me go to another leader here, Dr. Yabe Zain. You listen to Paul. He says, we want to mainstream this in planning. We don't want tokenism. And so on. We need the infrastructure. You from the World Bank, I know from my experience, former minister, now a parliamentarian, I'm saying I know the World Bank is leading energy planning in Africa. What would you say to Paul? I know the other challenges you raised, but as you listen to Paul, what do we need to do to make this central in the energy planning? Professor Brown also mentioned that. Dr. Zain, over to you.
Thank you so much, Candy. It's a great pleasure to be part of this very distinguished panel. As I listen to Professor Brown, Divna, and Paul, we see that all our thinking are converging together, right? I really resonate with many points you already discussed. So in a way, and I try to integrate as what can be done into, we call it a heart, head, and hands approach. So in order to really make a clean cooking as a priority, we have to use heart. The heart from everyone, heart from the political leaders, from the policymakers, that it is indeed a very important and challenging development issue that the government needs to put the heart in to prioritize it. And the heart also means that you put the people at the center of solutions. I think that's aligned with all you have discussed on raising political commitment on clean cooking. And that's probably the most important first step. And we do see that in Africa, that the growing commitment, especially shown during the high-level dialogue on energy last year. We see that quite a few countries, Kenya, the leader, Sierra Leone, and also thank you, Candy, for your leadership there, and Malawi, and Rwanda, etc. They all launched Clean Cooking Energy Compact. Now moving from heart to the head in terms of planning, as Paul also meant, essentially that you have to integrate access to clean cooking into part of the overall energy planning. And not only energy, but the overall country strategies for economic development, for social development, for climate change. So that's the essential part. With that, because in the past, it's often been left out. Even when we talk about the energy sector, it's mostly about power sector. But now we need to change, that need to be integrated in the electrification planning. That's Professor Ed Brown mentioned. But in the past, it's not considered. And into the overall energy planning based on what country's comparative advantages and based on the economic development, the impacts that affect to various sectors. So our estimate is that the cost of inaction without access to clean cooking in Africa estimated to be about 330 billion US dollars per year. More than half is about the cost on the gender, lost productivity. If we can bring access to clean cooking and utilize the women's productivity, it will definitely help the economic development. So at the World Bank, right now that the board focus on this major analytical product called Country, Climate, and Development Reports, CCDRs. So we, for country, take a broader view of the climate and development key dimensions, and including from energy to environment, other agriculture, etc., other sectors. And our team is providing inputs to ensure the CCDR include the dimension of clean cooking. Because one of the challenges of clean cooking is cross-sectoral. So we call it the orphan sector. It's not necessarily a big part of the key priority under different sector. You can say, okay, it's related to gender, it's related to environment, related to the agriculture, related to energy, but who is taking lead? So right now we certainly need a government, particular agency to take lead. Okay, this is the mandate. I need to champion, I need to coordinate, I need to implement the target set for the country. And another key element I want to emphasize is its coordination. Because on one hand, there's lack of champion, but on the other hand, there also, because it's cross-sectoral, it's the need for coordination. It's particular that I see that the carbon finance is a new opportunity. However, there's also caution. If the carbon finance regulation, the market is not properly designed, it can have perverse outcomes. For example, if a developer get carbon finance and then start to have large scale free distribution, think about it. It will completely destroy market and wipe out innovation, wipe out local suppliers. So part of its planning and program design is to have an institutional champion and have the capability to coordinate among various sectors and to ensure that the policies, programs are aligned and integrated to achieve, in the end, we want to achieve sustainable market development to achieve our goals of universal access and zero carbon emissions. I think that's the key that the government, and we are help, the bank here is help. I believe that the DIFNA and Brown, all people here try to help to ensure that, okay, we probably think through all the key challenges, opportunities, and coordinate. And to one is bring everyone's efforts together. Second is to ensure that efforts are aligned and complement to each other, and to really achieve this goal, very important part of the development agenda, especially in Africa.
Thank you. I see that all of us agree on the planning side. We agree on mainstreaming. And when I listen to DIFNA, it is obvious to me that part of that happens when you have embedded people who are focusing on this, like Paul is doing in Kenya, that are ready to say, yes, we will provide the technical inputs, we will be there in all of these discussions, and can provide inputs when they're doing energy planning or economic development planning. But let me go to Maggie, Dr. Maggie Matinga. Maggie, as I listen to Paul says there are social and cultural barriers He says people think firewood is free. And then you listen to Dr. Zhang saying we need to connect the heart with the head. There's that human element. Sorry, I'm picking on you, my sister, but you and I know how our mothers and cousins cook. Can we break those social barriers? Can we go from the heart to the head now and move the planning? Over to you. By the way, Ed, Dr. Brown, prepare yourself, because I'm coming back to something that Paul said. I just want you to be prepared. The infrastructure to manufacture. I saw your wonderful electric stove, and I'm saying to myself, who is making them? Are they making them in Kenya or somewhere else? And the entrepreneurship, I'll come back to you on that in a minute, the infrastructure. But let me go back. Maggie, will our sisters believe that they can do electric cooking? You're muted.
To begin with, let me just thank you for inviting Energia to this forum, and also offer you apologies from Sheila, who was supposed to be here today, but she couldn't make for family reasons. So I'm standing in very, very big shoes to fulfill. But coming back to your answer, our sisters, we at Energia, we are unequivocal that we cannot achieve universal clean cooking or any of the SDGs really without the inclusion of women. And of course, the question is, will these women cook with this electricity? Well, let me tell you a story. In the US, when electricity came, not a lot of women used it for cooking for various reasons, from religious reasons to not understanding how it works, to not having the appliances. And the impact of whether it was benefiting women or not was not very clear. And Yahweh talked about productivity. The impact of productivity on women was only seen in about pretty much the second to the third generation of women from the ones that first started. My point is, change takes time. If we start giving up on electric cooking or gas cooking or modern clean energy cooking, because in 2020, 1 woman or 10 women told us that, they don't know how this is going to work, or if it might not cook their beans very well, then I think we are missing an opportunity for transition. So yes, I believe that women will change. But for women and communities that we're addressing to change, they have to be part of the solution. We cannot come to them and say, we have created this fantastic stove that we've tested in Oregon, and we had a meeting in Oregon and we all thought it worked very well. Use it. We can no longer do that. We need to involve them. We need to involve women as entrepreneurs, as leaders, as consumers, as stakeholders at every level of the clean cooking sort of pathway to make sure that those changes happen and those changes are sustainable. And talking about going back to the delivery units at a policy level, it means that those delivery units also need to have the gender expertise, the expertise to understand what do women need, how do we need to support innovation that is responsive to women's needs, or policy that is responsive to women's needs, and how do we make them part of it? It goes back also to resourcing, making sure that as we are providing the resources, whether it's climate finance or other forms of finance, that resource is designed in a way that women entrepreneurs can access it. Because from Nigeria's experience, we have seen that when you talk about last mile populations, which is the biggest challenge in clean cooking, really, women are a key to transforming those markets, not only as users, but we have seen women be at the forefront of marketing, of saying to another woman, sister, this is what I'm using in my household, it works. And that's when the change happens. And yet, when we look at the funding, when you look at the decision making, and when you look at the people in the forums, those women are absolutely absent. So we need to change that forum and in that formula and start including women and seeing them as change agents at every level. And there was a comparison in COVID. When you look at clean cooking and the gender aspect in particular, it is still pretty much almost a box ticking exercise where everything is designed and said, well, we have a program, let's add gender and social inclusion. And it really needs to be the other way around. We have an issue that mostly affects women, that is mostly women who are experts in the cooking, how cooking is done in their cultures. How do we build results-based financing around their needs? How do we build technology and innovation around their needs and really transform the way we think about that. And finally, I want to go to the question, to just a bit of a comparison to bring us back to reality. When you look at COVID financing, Ed Brown said at the beginning of the call that COVID has killed over 4 million in about 18 months. And that number is, died because of lack of clean cooking in a year. Well, in those 18 months, actually in about the first 6 to 9 months of COVID, the world mobilized over $12 trillion. That is a lot of money. And we have mobilized that money, yes, to shore up vaccine production, yes, to shore up, to address the impacts of COVID. And yes, but we have mobilized that money in essence, if you look at who is affected by COVID, to protect middle-aged people, older people like me, and very old people. Why can we not mobilize similar amount of money to protect our future, to protect these children that can't see their fifth birthday because they're in polluted environments? We need to be able to have that commitment from our leaders globally, but also from African leaders, from Asian leaders, where the lag in cooking is the highest, to say we're putting this money on the table, match it up, talking to multilateral banks and other partners, and really mobilize that fund and target it in a way that puts women at the center of the solutions.
Thank you very much. Professor Ed Brown, infrastructure on the ground. I'm going to come to you, Dimfna. There are issues, I'm coming back to you, and the delivery unit. For example, Maggie says women should be in. Dr. Zhang says our planning has to be people-centered. So, and then Paul says we need to create awareness. We need to have cross-sectoral. So I'm coming back to you to say, hey, how would the delivery unit, and I think Yabe also said we needed champions. How would the delivery unit try to address all of this? But I'll come to you. I give you time to think about it. But I go back to Professor Brown. Tell me, infrastructure, production systems, how is that going to work? Or the utilities? Electric cooking is important, but is the Kenya Power Authority thinking that way? Is the Sierra Leone National Power Authority thinking that way? Over to you.
Brilliant questions. And also, Maggie, thank you for your contributions there. I think there's some really, really important points. I want to say something in relation to what Maggie was saying as well, if I may, Kende. On the interest from the existing electricity infrastructure suppliers, yes, it's emerging. So, for example, the work we're doing in Kenya, we've been working in partnership with Kenya Power and with some mini-grid operators over the course of the last couple of years. Under the current project that we're working on, that will deepen. We've just announced a new partnership with Umeme in Uganda, where we're doing similar work. Where they've also recently announced, as I mentioned, a new tariff specifically targeted at cooking. So on that level, that's just two examples. I would say that in the first 3 years of MEX, we've been, I think, quite successful at getting the message around the need to consider electric cooking accepted within the clean cooking community. What we really are now working on is working much more strongly in the power sector itself, which is precisely what you're suggesting we needed to do. So I think that's really important. Secondly, you also asked about production and where the solutions that are being marketed are being produced. At the moment, the majority of, for example, electric pressure cookers and rice cookers are produced in China. There is also a market in other individual countries where I'm just thinking of for India as being another major example. However, there is, for example, the stove manufacturer Burn in Kenya is investing in a new production facility to produce their own electric pressure cooker. There's similar things happening in the setting up of production units for induction stoves in other parts of East Asia. So there is the beginnings of a movement towards that direction. One of the things we've done through our Challenge Fund is to support innovators and entrepreneurs that have interesting ideas in this sector. But it's interesting as well that it isn't necessarily only the smaller smaller entrepreneurs that the opportunities are within the electricity sector. So, for example, like in the off-grid sector, what we're also looking at is some of the really major existing companies that can bring a scaled approach that hasn't existed within the cooking sector up until now. So I think that's really important. The second thing I wanted to touch on is I found Maggie's point about the long-term nature of change. I 100% agree with that. And looking at that, I think we don't look at the historical experiences of transition to electricity as much as we should do. However, I think we should also be looking at processes of social change as they're occurring. Too often, I think the clean cooking community see an Africa of 20 years ago that is predominantly rural. And actually, one of the biggest challenges, how do we adjust to the changing realities of urban Africa, which is going to become the predominant form of life that most people in Africa have within a small number of generations. And you begin to see that process of change happening already. And actually, electric cooking suits those lifestyle changes incredibly well, being able to set your dinner to be ready when you get back from work, being able to do something that takes half the time that it would do to light the charcoal stove and so on and so forth. So all of those kinds of elements are actually driven by change that is being produced by people, and frequently by women, who no longer want to have to do all of those tasks and menial tasks that they have to do to use those traditional forms there. So I think that's really important. The final thing is going back to what Paul was saying, which connects across to Maggie, is that Kenya has had the first gender and energy strategy of any African nation. I know Energia were involved in the production of that strategy. And one of the things we're doing in the creation of the terms of reference for all of the National Clean Cooking Strategy together with the ministry is making sure that it absolutely connects to that policy and that has all of the facets of the clean cooking strategy that are being assessed at regular milestones include assessment against the criteria of that strategy. So that's just one example of where that can occur effectively.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Dimtra.
Thank you. Yeah, just following up on Maggie's point around how important it is to have the users and the woman at the center of anything that gets designed, not just the products, but also the policies and other approaches, and how we strengthen them and support them in their own growth as leaders in the sector. One of the initiatives that we're attaching to the delivery units network, Maggie, is the User Insight Lab, that won't just focus on, as I said, the product innovation, but all the other innovations that need to happen in that broader ecosystem to then feed all that information into the delivery units at a country level. So I completely agree with you there, Maggie. And then secondly, Kande, the narrative that we currently really are focusing on, I think is important, and one that has really evolved in the last 4 years. But the other thing that we're attaching to Delivery Units Network is this evidence to action hub. And so the narratives that we're focusing on there are moving away from a really important one, which is like, and clean cooking has to be part of energy planning, to one where actually we're bringing in adjacent ecosystems into that conversation. The food systems ecosystem, like why isn't anybody here really focused on food systems and how we connect that with clean cooking, which ultimately there are like the closest connections you could think of. Nature-based solutions, like we really need to think about all the attention and money that's flowing into nature-based solutions, and how do we connect that with the clean cooking ecosystem. And then finally, gender lens investing, huge community out there that really wants to think about how they can move their impact funding into areas where they're really directly impacting women. And so the Clean Cooking Alliance is working with all of those three adjacent ecosystems to drive that narrative into the clean cooking space, with the ultimate goal of therefore driving funding into the clean cooking space, because all the plans and all the narratives that we have are wonderful and really important, but in the end, it's all about the money. We just need more money into this ecosystem and into this sector. And so that's where we should be really focusing on, Kande.
Yes, and you see, Dr. Zhang also mentioned the whole issue of coordination, and I'm just putting myself, because I worked in government before briefly, and I'm looking at Paul. I'm sure Paul is saying, wow, wouldn't it be wonderful that I have a delivery unit working with me in Kenya, where I have someone on the analytical side backed by the World Bank and the MEX program. I have somebody like Dr. Mitanga with me looking at the anthropology side. sociological issues to convince people that, yes, they can transition. So that collaboration also, Paul, I'm sure, is needed in the ground from the players, the institutions who want to solve this. Because if we do everything in isolation, we don't get the full impact. Paul, how do you see that?
Thank you so much, Kande. And yes, delivery is a critical element. And I think, yes, we are looking forward to a situation where every player is holding their part of the lever so that we can be able to deliver. And what has happened is with the delivery units, then we are able to provide the kind of capacity that is needed at each stage of the value chain, so that when we finally put it together, the delivery model captures all the key parameters that need to be incorporated in delivering the services. And so it's no longer government doing, actually, government provides an enabling environment, but we want to see all the players. Of course, we think the public funding is important, but we need to get, first of all, the right skills, and how do we coordinate them to be able to deliver? How do we learn from the past? Because again, we've seen projects which have not performed very well. Now, if we want to scale, then we need, first of all, to learn from the mistakes that could have been created. So for me, it's a holistic approach. I like what Divna says. We need to look at it from that ecosystem approach, because then we are able to see within that ecosystem, what do we need to emphasize? What do we need to de-emphasize? Where do we need to place the resources? And that way, we'll be able to make a concrete and a clear movement in scaling up. Back to you, Kande.
So now I shift to finance. Good intentions. You've also talked about the policy work that is needed. We know some of the solutions. Dimfna has emphasized speed and scale. Dr. Ed Brown also emphasized speed and scale. So I come back to you, Yabe. Investments matter here. We're not talking about charity approach, as somebody said. We don't want tokenism here. So I know you're doing some work in Rwanda. You've established the Clean Cooking Fund. And if I remember correctly, the approach was an investment approach. Where do we get the money to bring these solutions? You've given some estimates before. I mean, where do we get the funds? Professor Brown in his presentation also had some numbers there about cash required. Over to you.
Yes, thank you, Kande. Because that's the part of when talking about heart, head, hands. In the end, it's about implementation. For any implementation, you need investments, you need financing. That's what can really make things happen to deliver results on the ground. So at the World Bank, we launched a Clean Cooking Fund during the Climate Summit in 2019. The idea is to provide incentive to co-finance with development financing, concessional financing from the World Bank, IDA, and potentially other development banks to co-finance, to leverage that development financing. Because previously, as we talk about various challenges, barriers, not a lot of financing has been drawn into the cooking sector. And while having this dedicated Clean Cooking Fund is to provide incentive for the government, for the implementing agencies, for the bank, World Bank team to have dedicated funding for clean cooking. And the how to structure the financing is also key, right? Because that for any financing resources, they are scarce resource that have to be used effectively. You want to achieve results, leverage more financing. So we structured the operation in a way is to really try to attract, motivate more private financing and help the private sector to be successful in the cooking sector. We use the results-based financing approach to basically pay for results at the output, outcome, and impact level. Eventually, we all want to look at the impact in terms of climate impact, gender, health, livelihood impacts. So that's the idea. But in order to achieve that impact results, they often have upfront financing requirement. You need to take time to have inventory, you need time to develop distribution channel and to deliver results to consumers. So the Clean Cooking Fund really provide more flexible financing that to really fill in that the market variability gap. So in the case of Rwanda, we, based on the government request, and also we fully agree, structured as a pro-poor RBF, because we know the customers, the beneficiaries are different segments. We provide them higher subsidies to the lowest income category of consumers, and provide higher subsidies for the higher performance products. Because we also know that the tiered approach in terms of different cooking solutions and the high performance that cost more, but they generate more impacts. So we structure such a way to make sure that the supply, the product fit to the consumer's needs. I also want to add in terms of agenda impacts, because all Clean Cooking Fund will require every project we co-finance to have proactive gender actions, not only about just consultation during the design of the project, ensure the gender-informed consultation, but actually the financing side.
Yeah, Yabi, if I push you hard a little bit, do you see many more African countries in their IDA negotiations with the bank saying, yes, we want to include clean cooking? Second, remember what Professor Brown said, for the 40-60 by 2030 agenda, I say, look, if we could only say that as you're doing the electrification planning, that 40% of that solution, meaning even the funding, can be targeted towards enabling more people to cook with electricity, hopefully clean electricity. Do you see that possibility and more African countries beginning to prioritize that when they talk to you for the IDA funding?
I do see it, Candy. I'm optimistic on that, because okay. I do see over the past few years, especially with a high-level dialogue, a small country showing commitment. I was very impressed that the president of Malawi gave his full speech on clean cooking, and as a result, I share to our team, and for the Malawi Climate and Development Report, CCDR, this high-level overarching document, we have a deep dive note on clean cooking, because we recognize that's such important, and once you have that, it will influence the development financing. Because in the end, you highlighted the priorities, and then the financing need to flow to meet that priority demand.
Yeah, as Maggie is listening to you, I'm sure she's saying, that is good, but when the money comes, and it's a lot of women's problem, they don't see the money. The subsidy might not go to them. Maggie, how would you help Yabi in this planning to say, well, here's how the women can benefit from those subsidies? And of course, I'll go back to Dimfna to say, hey, Dimfna, think through for us climate finance. How does it fit in here? How does private sector, philanthropic money, other monies come in here? But let's go first to Maggie. Maggie, will the women get these subsidies in Rwanda or Kenya?
I think they will, if Yabe structures it in such a way. But I would, I'm from Malawi as a disclaimer. So yes, I'm very happy our president was all about clean cooking. But what we have seen in Malawi as well in the last 10 years is the inclusion of women in that market supply chain. And not just women selling 2 or 3 stores, but women really supplying a big market, either to the NGOs, to the private sector, and so on and so forth. And how has that happened? That has happened by a consistent building of capacities and a consistent building of a market structure that addresses women's problems. So, for example, one of women's problems is how do they go out there and find a reasonable market when they live in a small village, when they've got low levels of education, and they don't have much capital. And what development partners have come in is to identify the market, train them on how to build very high quality clean cooking stoves, and then link them to these markets. And women have shown themselves very capable. There's, creating something like as simple as just funding a warehouse, which might not even cost $2,000, can completely transform how women are involved in the clean cooking markets. We've seen something that might be seen as basic empowerment-based training, where the women are taught not just the business skills, but also the confidence of how to negotiate in markets, the confidence of trusting their businesses has completely transformed their market. So I think it is possible to involve women when these funds are built in such a way that they respond to this need. When we talk about research-based financing, for example, it's very well, beautiful tool to use to move things along. But when that research-based financing is completely focused on a product, for example, or on profitability, or on the sort of the traditional economic metrics, it often misses out on the women. But when you start putting in issues like impact, and that impact is a factor of who has been reached, for example, how poor are the persons that have been reached, and a combination of various factors, then it begins to change the equation of who gets that funding. So I do think that we can do that if that commitment runs through all the, right from the top to the bottom. The women are ready to support whether it's clean, biomass-based clean cooking, LPG or electric cooking, but we need to put the structures that respond. Risk, moving the risk from them holding all the risk to getting, part of that risk on public financing, for example, is another means of doing that.
Infra, over to you.
Thank you, Kande. And so I think on the climate finance side, I think we could find ourselves as an ecosystem in a scenario where 5 years from now, the big climate funders all of a sudden are going to go, oh my goodness, we're not going to meet our climate targets, which is in 2030, because we've, for the last 5 years, last 15 years, last 20 years, forgot about investing in clean cooking. And so nobody will meet their climate targets or their SDGs or any of their development targets if they don't invest in clean cooking. And so for us as an ecosystem to get in front of these big climate funders right now and make sure that they're understanding that they have to include clean cooking and clean cooking options and projects and programs and companies in their portfolio of investment is really critically important, Kande. And I think Ed may have something to add to that conversation as well.
Ed?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, I mentioned it as one of the two areas that are really important of new areas of funding into clean cooking. But I'd also echo, I can't remember who it was that said it now, but that we have to be very careful in the sense that the danger is that if we are not absolutely clean in terms of the type of analysis that we do that shows the reality of the carbon saved, then we run the risk of everything being seen as greenwashing and running all sorts of risks. So I think it's really important that we get this right. We've invested in this. We have a new methodology that we've had approved by the gold standard on metered devices. It could be LPG, it could be electric cooking. We're continuing to work that. We're taking a company through that process over the next couple of months. We're working with CCA and with Shell Foundation and with others to explore what else we can do in this. And it comes back to what Maggie was saying as well, which is not only carbon impact funding is only one element of impact funding. There's also the possibility of using the data-driven types of appliances that bring greater yield in terms of improvements in people's lives that we can utilize to make impact funding more attractive to those people that want to invest in it. So we've already done some work with Cardano. We're also looking at how far can we use the automation of the utilization of devices like pay-as-you-go LPG or of ethanol or of electric cooking, the fact that you can remotely monitor the usage of those types of approaches to cooking opens up all sorts of opportunities, not only in carbon finance, but also in other forms of impact finance. So it's a ways off being in place yet, but it's something that I think both CCA and ourselves, and indeed the bank, are really interested in. So I'm sure there's opportunities for all of us to work together in making that a reality as quickly as possible.
Paul, I want to come to you. Public financing has always been important in bringing energy solutions. I mean, if you think of the early days of all of us trying to promote off-grid solutions, donor money made a big difference. Paul, do we see a situation where in Kenya, for example, donors will be coming together in Kenya to say, okay, we all recognize that clean cooking is important, and then we will allocate some of our funding to these solutions. I saw in Europe now, I was just there last week, big announcements from the EU for energy supports to Africa, big announcements. Do you see you playing a key role to say, okay, or in the case of Yabe and others in Rwanda, that the government says to them, we as a government, we are also putting in some of our money to show we are ready to solve this problem, but we want you as well as prioritization, putting some of your monies in to looking at clean cooking issues. Remember, we still have to do a lot of analysis. We still need to build a lot of capacities. And in some cases, you need to do subsidies. And some of that subsidy sometimes comes from public funds. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you very much, Kande. And indeed, the whole issue about public financing is extremely, extremely important, because we do realize that there are certain actions that government is best placed to address the inherent barriers, even when it comes to awareness creation, basic things to do with the fiscal policies. These are things which require to be supported through public funding. And in that sense, yes, the government needs to show leadership by ensuring that they are also providing their money and budgets into these interventions, so that we can then be able to leverage from the donor partners. Now, what we are thinking in Kenya, if I may go specific, and we have a new leadership in the Ministry of Energy, and the leadership is now very clear in terms of indicating that we must be clear what we want, so that we can focus on the most important thing. That in itself gives the government the thinking that we must be seen to prioritize. We must put cooking at the same pedestal like electrification. Now, these things have not happened. I have looked at the statistics of investments in the last many years, and I realized, for example, the question of these investments, how much comes to Africa? And I've seen between 2010 and 2020, out of almost $3 trillion, only 60 billion came to Africa, which is only 2%. And when you break that one down into what went to cooking, it becomes very negligible. We must now reverse. And how do we do it? Government must provide the leadership in terms of giving a higher priority in budgeting. And we also need to be clear in terms of, if we go to the funding, what specific actions do we take? Because I've seen the talk is, there's a lot of funding that has been announced. In COP26, a lot of these initiatives were said. But the question is, if they came to Kenya today and somebody says, we have $1 billion USD, do we know what we can do with that money? And this is where it gets real, the thinking. And this is where you need the planners, the thinkers, people that would see where it needs to be focused. And so, yes, I wanted to say public funding is a very critical element. It must be increasing over time as we look at some things which only government can do. Kenya has just developed what we call a green incentive fiscal policy framework, where we are trying to say, because of sectors requesting for tax waivers, incentives, and so on, why don't we have a policy framework that says where the priorities will be, what kind of incentives are to be given, and what will be the sunset clauses? Because if you talk about subsidies, subsidies can also be harmful if they are not properly focused and crafted. And so these are the real things which we need to focus on. Thank you.
And Yabi warned us about something. Don't bring stoves and other solutions and give for free. You distort the market. So I remember those mistakes in the early days, 10, 15 years ago, even with solar solutions. But I want to go back. When I listen to you, Paul, it comes back to what Ed Brown said at the beginning. Dimfna as well mentioned it, prioritization. If the local government does not say so, the multilateral institutions, the development finance institutions, the donors that look, clean cooking is a priority for us. It's about energy access, saving lives, and so on. Who will allocate money? Nobody would. They will say, okay, we'll do something else. So how do we get that political prioritization? And Ed had it in his presentation. So I'll go first to Maggie Malawi. President made a good speech at the UN, but is it translating to the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Development that set the agenda when they talk to the donors? The Minister of Energy and Dimfna, myself, Paul, we are not in the room. Does the Finance Minister know this?
Well, it's a journey that we are on, I think. In Malawi, it has been a back and forth. We still a lot of discussions with the Minister of Finance to really plan clean cooking in the whole, all the planning. And I think there is need for engagement between the energy sector and the finance sector, as well as the gender sector, the gender ministries, to actually talk about this and what it means and then budget for it. Because the Minister of Finance doesn't know what it means. So I think that discussion really needs to happen for that to be planned in. And then moving from the country, I think we also need a lot of regional collaboration where we have SADC, for example, coming in with that commitment on clean cooking. We have ECOWAS coming in with that commitment on clean cooking. Already we've had the East African community taking off taxes on clean cooking. We need more of that to be happening in these regions so that they're serving the regional needs. But then we need them to converge at the highest level. So, for example, when we're coming into COP27, I personally would like to see African presidents stand together and say, this is our commitment to clean cooking. This is our target as Kenya, as Malawi, as Nigeria, and everybody else. And my hope, I'm glad that Paul Mbuti is here. My hope is that the countries that have already taken lead, Kenya, Malawi, Rwanda, can come together and say, gentlemen, I think all the ministers, they are gentlemen or ladies, let's change this. Let's call upon our colleagues and discuss this and be ready for COP27 and say, this is our commitment. This is what we need to get done. Then we'll see real changes.
Well, Maggie, I think you're reading my notes. Do you have a drone over me here?
I'm a Malawian.
Exactly to COP27. Hey, we tried, all of us in this forum and many other players, Sheila and others are not here, but many colleagues, in the 11th hour, last 2 months before COP, to rally around to get movement at COP26. We got some. So Dimfna first, Yabe, Ed Brown, then I come back to the country people. What should we be doing now to achieve what Maggie said? That we have presidents going now to Cairo, the Africa COP we're calling it, to say, yes, clean cooking is a priority. In fact, when we're talking about new commitments, we want X% to go in. What, quickly, 2 minutes. Dimfna, what do we do? How do we get that? And then Yabe and Ed, and then I go back to Paul.
Yeah, just really quickly, I think COP27, we had great momentum, but obviously, again, that means nothing if there's not funding that comes with that momentum. And I can be on as many panels as I want, but it means nothing if there's not more money coming into the sector. So for COP27, we're really going to focus on making sure that we drive financing into the sector. And one of the ways that we do it is through working with other partners to elevate it up to the level of political leadership in the different countries and bring them to COP to do exactly what you were saying, Maggie, to announce these larger commitments, because it is a COP that is in Africa. And so we want to leverage that momentum. And then to do that, the Clean Cooking Alliance, we've been able to secure a secondment from somebody in my organization with the Climate Champions team. And so we will now have one person with the Climate Champions team whose only job it is to make sure that preparations for COP27 are really including and focused on clean cooking as well. So there's different avenues that we're pursuing right now. And I think we can really collectively create a very impactful and powerful COP27.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I think that I fully agree with Difna. It's another key opportunity to really elevate the sector, showing the political commitment, and then showing the investment financing needed to achieve the impacts. I think that, frankly speaking, clean cook sector has high rate of return of generating carbon credits. I think private sector, a lot of private sector recognize that. They start coming into the sector. But it's important the public sector need to be very clear how to design the market properly to avoid any potential greenwash. And indeed, if it is designed properly, carbon revenue can be used as a source of revolving fund that can provide the needed incentives for the private sector to thrive, to promote innovation and sustainable market development. I think that it's over the next few months, one is to highlight these interlinkages between clean cooking, climate, and development. We are doing that analytical work with quite a few countries on the CCDR overarching document. And second, to show that what worked, what does not work. To the public sector need to know, okay, this is important to think through in terms of its planning side. And then third, I think financing. The World Bank already have the clean cooking as part of energy compact we put forward. But we want more of the financing institutions and the private sector philanthropies to see this is areas that really worth investments for impacts. Yeah, let me start.
Ed, what do we do between now? It's already March, by the way, Ed.
Yeah.
We start next week. What do we do?
I think, well, firstly, your call was about what do we do to get African leaders to make that case. I think as a UK citizen and as someone running a program run by the UK government, I think we need to be persuading our governments to prioritise and to raise the profile. I was really quite shocked about the lack of ability we had to influence the agenda at the last COP. We now know that we've got more time to try and do that. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, I think, for COP, we need to show the connection to climate. I think we are all seeing that climate is a massively important part of what we're doing, not only for its own sake, but also in terms of the potential for new forms of funding to help us to achieve the things that we set out together. So I'd make the call that I made right at the beginning of my presentation about connecting these two areas effectively so that we actually start making targets that relate to low carbon elements within what we're doing on the access side. So the 40-60 by 2030, I would ask, is a clear rallying call for this. Finally, the important component of that, as I said before, is that we seem to have, I think, to some degree, won the task of changing the agenda within the clean cooking sector. And I think it's absolutely right that we raise the profile of clean cooking. But I think it's also about actually raising the fact that of the opportunities that there are to some of the people that perhaps have got a larger level of power already. So I'm thinking about the power sector. Power sector is far more powerful, than the clean cooking sector as we see it. If we can convince them of the importance of this and the importance and the ease with which the opportunities for electric cooking can be grasped using existing funding. If we get that message across that it isn't only calling for new amounts of funding, but just a little bit of that 100 billion a year could be utilised in this way, then I think that's a really sellable message that is going to meet the goals that we all have together.
Paul, I come to you. Let me tell you, I laid some groundwork in Brussels last week, and we need your leadership and your government. We have a champion, Madame Abu Zaid, Dr. Abu Zaid, at the AU, African Union Commissioner for Energy. She's already started laying the groundwork in Cairo. We had a good discussion now. She's ready to work with us. Fatih Birol at the International Energy Agency is ready to work with us. So, Paul, here are some ideas, and I need your reaction quickly. We believe we should take advantage of the Sustainable Energy for All Forum in Kigali, in Rwanda. Can we bring your First Lady from Kenya, and through Maggie, the First Lady from Malawi, to visit their friend in Rwanda, backed by all of us, CCA, all of us. So we have some mini cluster of East African First Ladies backing us, so they can remind the husbands that, yes, we need clean cooking on the agenda. Of course, DIMFNA is bringing us together in October, I think in Accra. We do the same in West Africa. So I'm just looking at events I know some of you have planned, because we're talking about political mobilization. And Paul, finally, if we do that, but you and some of us begin to work with Madame Abu Zaid, she has an inroad already with President ICC. Can your government now, you've already played a leadership role for us at the UN, can you help mobilize some more support from the African Union so that we have a better space, better messaging in COP27 in Cairo? Over to you, in Egypt.
Thank you very much, Kande. And yes, this is a great thinking. Of course, when it comes to mobilizing the First Ladies to join this is something that we have thought through, not just now, but even before. And we also see the potential that this portends. Now, yes, I think it is doable, and we just need to touch the right levers so that we can get this happen. I do think that Kenya is willing. Right now, we are fortunate. The cabinet secretary we have is a person that has a passion for the sector, a passion for cooking. And I remember when we were in Glasgow, I was telling her that the short time she's going to be in the sector, the best legacy to leave is to lift clean cooking agenda, not only for Kenya, but for the region. And I'm sure we can leverage on that. I will be, in fact, going with her to Powering Africa Summit next month. And it's part of the discussion is how do we mainstream cooking, not only just for Kenya, but for the region? Because we think together we need solidarity. And I wanted to also add that even for those colleagues like Ed Brown, we need now to share these common interests, because I believe the World Bank has interest in cooking, makes us interested in cooking, the Clean Cooking Alliance, they have interests, governments have interest in this. The question is, how do we bring together into a solidarity package that can be able to move this process forward as we go to Cairo and as we go to Egypt for that matter? So I think, yes, it is doable. We need to seriously begin the process because we do not have much time, so that we can be able to put together some good package that can help accelerate the prioritization, as we say. And this, to me, will be the most important thing to do. So I think, but we must be guided by the clarity of what is it we want and how do we want it done. And looking at the different regional contexts and looking at also country perspectives, we can be able to leverage on what these mutual interests are, including what will be discussed in Kigali. Thank you, and back to you.
Thank you very much. Today, we didn't talk much about the private sector, but I'm sure in the next Indaba, we'll be able to talk about the private sector. We talked a lot about the public sector, public finance, creating sustainable markets, political prioritization. But the Indaba has a lot of private sector players. I guess what I would say here is we need the private sector badly. all of my colleagues here on this panel are all working with private sector entities. We need to produce the fuels, the clean fuels. We need to provide the key technologies that will deliver those fuels. We need the appliances that we use those fuels, whether it's electric cookers, special LPG, gas canisters, pay as you go. So I just want the audience to know, because I've been to Indaba several times, that we're not leaving you out. We just wanted you to know that many of us are trying to create that public policy space so you can invest. And we're looking at de-risking instruments so that, yes, finance can blend with your own private sector capital to deploy technology. And yes, you can make profits, but we can solve the bigger issues. We're looking at very difficult issues of results-based financing, demand-side subsidy to make these technologies affordable by consumers. So if you didn't hear us talk much about that, it is because we know already, just like we did for renewable energy technologies, that we need to create what Yabe said, sustainable markets. And you need governments to lead. When it comes to utilities, when it comes to energy issues, we need governments to help us create those markets, the right public policy, right legislation, and of course, some of the public financing. We want to thank the Indaba for giving us this opportunity. We did the same last year, but what we look forward to is the usual dynamism and momentum we get in South Africa when we're there in person. And so we are hoping that we'll all be able to fight COVID. But before the next Indaba, we know we'll be in Rwanda. We know we'll be in Egypt. We know we're going to be in Accra in October as well. So there are opportunities there where we can embed private sector in these discussions, but also political heavyweights, the presidents, the first ladies, and others who can help us make the case, civil society. And of course, I want to thank all our panelists. Thank you for the time you've given, and Liz Hart and the team. Thank you as always for coming back, calling us to say, hey, we have a platform, present your issues there. And finally, we all need to collaborate. We know it's good to make global commitments. We know we have pilots in countries, but what Yabe said is crucial here. We need to collaborate. And I believe indeed we need action on the ground, and these delivery units can bring us together so that we have embedded, sustained focus on clean cooking issues as we all desire. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope we'll have another platform where we're together again like this. But again, amongst us, we bring some big industrialists that will say, yes, we will build that infrastructure that Ed Brown and Paul talked about. Thank you so much for joining us today. All the best.